Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Don't Fear the Weight podcast with me, your tiny titan host, Vicky Masita. And today in the hot seat, I have got the most incredible person who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago on the TRA podcast, actually. He is looking much more beautiful this morning because a couple of weeks ago he was sporting a black eye. Now, we did agree that you were going to have some other kind of ailment going on with your face, didn't you? So the hair lip wasn't there and your torn off cauliflower ear isn't there.
No, I've stayed pretty this. I have got a burst lip, but it's on the inside, so you can't see that.
Oh, well, at least you brought something to the table anyway. It is Mr. Johnny Pain. Good morning, Johnny. How are you, love?
Good morning, Vicky. I'm great. Lovely day here, getting a nice coffee and pleased to speak to you again.
Fantastic. No, wonderful. Johnny, for the people who don't know who you are, obviously we were on a different channel last time. Could you just give us a little bit of a brief rundown about who you are and why I think you are so fabulous?
I have no idea why you think I'm fabulous, but I can explain who I am. That's doable. So I am Johnny Pain. I'm part of Complete Wound Performance. My background is a bit scattergun. I was and am again a fighter to all intents and purposes. I came up through self-protection and a little bit of what would you call it, behind the haystacks, kind of old school fighting. I wasn't a particularly good fighter, so once people started to get technically intelligent and all the rest of it, they could shut my game down. But what I was quite good at was applying a certain amount of strength. So I became a strength and conditioning coach. Those who can't do, teach. And have been doing that for the best part of 15 years. I've been with CHP now for the best part of 2.5, maybe 3 years, I think. And over there, I'm the combat sports specialist, but also have a great deal of interest in extreme endurance events. So my own athletic development has gone beyond the fighting and grappling and things into extreme endurance events, and I've done the Keltman triathlon, the spine race, which wasn't particularly successful. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later. The Arc of Attrition, great sort of 2, 3, sometimes 6 day long endurance events. And so along with my own push for that kind of things, I'm also looking after some athletes, quite a few athletes in that regard as well. So my own interest in that's quite vast, and it's a useful thing to have those two different parameters, being that CHP are known for working across that spectrum of athletes.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And that's what we're really interested in, because we've had a lot of people on this podcast who specialize in bodybuilding, specialize in fighting or powerlifting or strength sports. But to encompass all of those and have a complete human performance package, that's what we're really interested in. More so with the psychological effect that these massive endurance feats can obviously do for the human body, because the human body can take a toll, but realistically, it's your mind that can give out before your body does. Have you found that so much?
Very much so, very much so. It's key in actual fact. I think that we can entertain the idea of certain things. So now there's a huge uplift. It's been exciting to see a huge uplift in endurance activity, and even in strength athletes. But certainly across the board, more and more people are more interested in endurance events. But I think once you get beyond a certain threshold with that, and it depends on your interpretation of what endurance event is.
Yeah.
To person A, an endurance event could be 5K, 10K. They're enduring a longer event than they're used to. To person B, an endurance event might be something that's beyond 26 miles in a marathon setting. So once we've established those parameters and established exactly where the athlete's coming from, we then need to make sure that that athlete understands the psychological effects that this may have. And what we're getting at there is that beyond a certain threshold, and again, that will be different individually, there's going to be a point at which the physical meets the psychological. There's going to be a point at which you have to rely on to get a little wishy-washy about it, I suppose, an inner strength, or at least a psychological understanding of what the undertaking entails in order to get through that course. And many times we'll see people come up against that psychological wall maybe earlier than they would come up against a physical wall.
Right. Okay. I suppose it's a little. In fact, can you talk through some strategies that you can give to your athlete to almost ignore that mental barrier that they're going to be coming up against? Because the way that you were talking about that, it made me actually think about one of these Navy SEALs training, you know, when they get tortured by the opposite army and they can really put up with the torture before they give up that actual information. So it's what their body can take. So obviously I'm not going to say that you're going to put those kind of strategies into place for training. However, have you got any kind of strategies like that you put towards your athletes to almost ignore the mental pain?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting thing to bring up, actually, because there are physical strategies that we can put in place as well in order for them. And I know you're asking a specific question there, but we probably never get to the point where somebody can ignore the pain. We can get to a point where, and this is the same in any sport really, and speaks a little bit to fight sports as well, in actual fact. You can get to the point where you can endure the pain, and you can establish whether or not that pain is something you need to stop for, or something that you can push past. And I think perhaps the best strategy there is exposure to it. You know, it's very easy to easy is the wrong word. It's a very simple strategy to have people work, let's say, in a gym environment, and they can work on the treadmill, and they can perhaps build up a physical resilience to certain things. But if you put them out in a race situation, or depending whether they see it as a race, they might just want to complete a certain distance. But you put them in a situation where they're going to have to encounter sort of environmental changes, perhaps isolation, perhaps come up against, weather conditions, for instance, that they've never really experienced before. And you're almost guaranteed that athlete, having not been exposed to those conditions, is going to fail. Guaranteed is probably a bit of a heavy word to use there, but certainly it's more likely that they would fail. The flip side of that would be that you can push them too hard. You could have them. I mean, the instant go-to there is, okay, right, so we'll get them out in the hills, and we'll get them out, we'll take a few layers of clothes off that they might need and expose them to all kinds of horrors, like your special forces guys there. And if they endure that, then they're good to go,
Yeah.
That one, you've pushed these people too far, So probably the most important thing to understand when we're looking at the psychological effects of extreme endurance events, or even just any kind of endurance event, is the athlete themselves. The difference between you and I is the difference between how we need to handle you or I. And those experiences therein are going to tell us what we do next. So we do have strategies, but most of that is about listening to the athlete and allowing them to expose their own personality through programming, through training, through kind of pushing one edge, pushing another, see how they feel. That make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because, like you were saying, it depends on the kind of athlete that you have. And we did have a brief conversation on the TRA one about, say, bodybuilders or powerlifters wanting to go on and do these ultra marathons. And we were like, why? So why don't we delve into a little bit more about that? So let's have a look at one extreme to the other. Let's have a look at a powerlifter. Who doesn't have a lot of endurance, who just has to use a certain pathway for energy to do those 9 big lifts on meet day. And they come to you and they say, right, guess what? I want to do an ultra marathon. How on earth would you start their programming off to increase their endurance and obviously get them past that mental barrier of, holy crap, this is a long session and I have got the wind knocked out of me?
Yeah, well, there you go. There's a lot in that, in actual fact. We talked last time, and we'll cover it again here so that people that haven't seen that can catch up. But the why would be a really important question to discuss. So before we put a training program together, and before we kind of push into today we're doing X, tomorrow we're doing Y, and on the Wednesday we might do Z. We need to understand why that athlete wants to do what they're saying they're going to do. And sometimes it's really easy to package up. It's a particularly difficult thing to attend to. The enormity of it is kind of obvious. And for a competitive individual, for a powerlifter who understands the process and all the rest of it, of getting from a starting point to a completion point, then they can see that there is a logical process there as well. So the two aren't altogether different. You have a start point and you have a finish point, and what you need to do is try and chunk that down in the middle and find out how to get from A to B. But the why is important, because if the athlete has a why, well, just because it seems cool, which isn't unusual, it's might be, and as I said earlier on, it's becoming much more popular to do endurance events, and certainly extreme endurance events seems to have just jumped in popularity over the past 4 or 5 years, I would say. The why might be a little bit skewed. It might just be because it seems badass, and they want to do something else that's badass, and then you're going to have a conversation with them about, the difference in badassery.
Yeah, there are certain levels of badassery, and maybe you're not quite at this level just yet.
And actually, so the message that we're kind of promoting beyond the physiological stuff, the message that we're promoting is that yes, both are badass, and to get in the weight room or to get on the platform and lift more than you've ever lifted before, regardless perhaps of what the guys around and girls around you are doing. That's badass, to bump your strength. And when we look at it from an egotistical perspective, to have the ability that you're as strong as hell, stronger than the average guy, the strongest guy in your circle or whatever. That's huge, it's a great thing to push for. Most people, we find even through training, are pushing to be better than they were yesterday, which is a great thing to have people kind of delve into and understand. But the same applies to an ultra marathon or an extreme triathlon or something. Is that, yeah, that's super cool. If you can say, especially if you can say you've kind of attacked both, it's cool. Because what you get is, and I'm dancing around a little bit now, but what you get is a lot of people who will say, well, that's cool, Vicky, that you can pull X amount of weight in your body weight. Yeah, you're super strong, but can you run a marathon? And if your answer is no, you're left a little bit yourself going, no, I can't. And perhaps your answer will be, I don't want to. So what? I don't care. And that's cool. That's down to the individual. But if you're left with that lingering, I don't know, but I'm damn sure I could, then that's where the why comes from. It's like we're just setting boundaries and challenges, and I think that's the interesting thing about this kind of hybrid methodology, which goes beyond the physiological, is that we're kind of exploring people's, maybe this kind of slightly commercial push in the endurance world has allowed us to do this, but we're exploring people's opportunity to say, well, here's the boundary I thought I'd set. I thought I'd put myself in the box. I thought I'd happily decided I would be a strength athlete, and I've done that for the past 5, 6 years. And I'd almost said, no, well, obviously I'm a strength athlete, there's no way I can do that. But if we start talking to people and saying, you could do both, you could be a badass over here too, then people go, maybe I could be a badass. And so what we get is people attacking both. But going back to the question you asked, we need to understand what that why is, whether or not it is just about being a badass. It's cool, that's a great and noble cause, I think, but as long as those psychological expectations are met between the two, it's all very well and good saying, well, I'd like to do an ultra, but without understanding what that entails and where the pitfalls are going to be on that, it's doomed to failure.
Absolutely. And it's when you were saying that you could be a badass in both camps, could you realistically be a badass in both camps at the same time? So it's almost like concurrent training.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. No, where you would draw a line or throw a caveat into that answer is the likelihood of you being, if you're a specialist, you're a specialist. It's as simple as that. If you're going to push towards being the best powerlifter in your division internationally, then you're going to have to apply yourself to that with a really hard, solid focus. if you're also going to apply yourself to an ultramarathon with a hard, solid focus, then you're going to get a little bit of a drift away from how much you can put in, because we know at the elite level you're going to have to put in 100% to your sport. But when you're talking about individuals who and individuals who could quite conceivably still be elite, maintaining that strength output or still pushing that up a little bit, and also applying yourself to something else at the other end of the spectrum, yes, it's quite possible. I mean, we have data sets and examples of that all over the shop. It's I think, again, talking about the psychology is the psychological factor there is the one that actually has people maybe fail at one or the other. The message has been for so long that you can't do both, that it's still a very hard thing to get off people's back. This idea that, well, if I start attending to a 5K, then a 10K, then a 20K, eventually I'm just going to get weaker. And it's not necessarily the case.
That's interesting.
Well, you can find that one will, and this is where the science gets a little bit sticky, is that the interference effect has been quote unquote shown, but not proven within certain circumstances. So the science stacks up only within certain parameters. We would argue that the interference effect is reduced, if not null and void, if you're managing the programming appropriately. So I think we talked before about a kind of a foundational program. What you tend to find still a lot, and you'd think this doesn't make logical sense, but it happens all the time, is that somebody doing it, let's say you are training hard for your powerlifting and bodybuilding at the same time, which I know is something you're doing. And that's already two, not completely disparate, but two slightly separated disciplines. Certainly within the same camp, if you like, certainly within a muscle building camp, if you like.
Sure.
But you're doing two slightly separate things. If you then said, right, I also want to do an endurance event, and then looked at endurance training and tried to apply that to the training that you're doing at the moment, you're going to get not so much overload, but sort of overkill in your programming, and eventually something's going to start suffering. Intensity waves are going to be difficult to maintain. The intensity you might need over here is going to be kind of swamped by the endurance that you just added in. So what is key is managing the programming, essentially, making sure that you're not suffocating one element of the programming with another. And I think that's what we see most, is people have come. Alex went through the same thing in putting together and sort of discovering this process of hybrid training. I did the same thing, whereas we've kind of pushed and pushed, trying to do both things at once at the extreme end of it, and fallen off the edge and picked up injuries, etc., etc. And you think, well, how can I manage my training so that I can do both, but not pick up injuries, not fail, not overtrain, which is a different conversation, but certainly not hit a wall anyway. And that's what we feel that we've gotten some experience in and pushed athletes towards over the past X amount of years.
Excellent. And that's really interesting that you were talking about overtraining. And I know that is a completely separate subject, because a lot of people have said that it's very, very difficult to overtrain, but you're actually under recovering. And that was one of the main issues. So in terms of you obviously picking up injuries because you are pushing yourself that little bit too hard, you were talking about a spinal brace and doing some kind of an ultramarathon in that. Is that what happened from that case? Was that point where you were kind of testing this and you went over the level?
Well, that's a can of worms to open up, really. I probably shouldn't. So,
we like cans of worms, though, Johnny. That's what we do best.
Well, it's a good example and a bad example, in actual fact. I kind of sit in I'm a bad example, because I've had so many injuries. I broke my knee in 1999, really very badly, completely adjacent to all this, in a skateboarding accident. So,
yeah. Right, now hang on a minute. How old were you at this point, Johnny?
Well, 1999 was a good while ago. Let's say that much. 20s, in my 20s, I think.
Oh, fair enough then. At least, yeah. Okay, all right. We'll let that one slide then.
I was on the skateboard just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But although I liked it, the accident itself, without labouring it too much, saw my knee my shin go straight through my knee. It just sort of the whole
Yeah.
And kind of exploded. And so I've had a history since then of reconstructions. It's been tampered with and reconstructed 7 times now. So they've been in and out of that knee, which means that, and this actually is something that's applicable to the conversation in a few different ways. If you do use me as an example, is that it means that my running gait is slightly off because I spent so long that at the time they said I probably wouldn't walk again, which clearly I've proven wrong. My gait's slightly odd. I run with a slight tilt in my hip to try and protect that left leg, etc. So it means that I'm not running efficiently. I'm running efficiently for me most of the time, but my running can, if I'm not 100% focused on what I'm doing, I can kind of start to cause these kind of issues that you would expect. You know, if you're lopping sideways
Sure.
over and over, you're going to get a lot of problems. You know, so I have to be very careful doing that. So the spine race came after. So the spine race itself is we have 7 days to complete it. It's just under 300 miles, the length of the Pennine Way, which is basically Derbyshire right up to the Scottish borders.
Okay. And
it's tough. I mean, that's a tough thing to walk. People take months to walk that. You know, the guy that wins it usually comes in between 3 and 4 days, but the weather conditions are outrageous, etc. But it's a good thing to talk about in terms of what people can face with it. Oh, this is very extreme. This is one of the hardest races on earth, but the conditions I faced or the things that I went through, you couldn't replicate in training. There's no way you could replicate it. Now, we have to kind of track back a little bit. But in training, about 18 weeks before the event, I broke my other leg. Now,
oh God, right, okay.
If you know me, you'll go, oh, another break. So I've broken almost everything. What with fighting and this thing and that thing.
Sure.
So I had done been doing some really extreme training, and I'd actually been doing a little bit of training for the special forces as well. So I'd been trying to push towards something there. And I'd done what I shouldn't do, in actual fact. I'd kind of gone off program and added things in. Alex was looking after my programming at the time, and well, I'm just going to do this extra bit of work today. I'm just going to do this, you know, and my leg broke, which is an extreme result, but it did do. You know, it started off as a stress fracture, and again, jumping around all over the place. My pain tolerance is really quite high, almost to a point where it's detrimental because I kind of tried to work through that. And I tried to work through it for so long that I made it worse. So it was actually snapped through, and I thought it was just a little break. So, oh well, we'll just carry on. And I made it worse and worse. So the recovery for the spine race, the training for the spine race was interrupted by recovery. I had to spend 8 weeks in a moon boot, which I hadn't gone to the hospital for that. So when I eventually said this isn't working, I went back to the hospital. They said it was snapped through, so I had to get another 8 weeks in the moon boot. So 16 weeks out of direct training, certainly out of sport-specific training. I couldn't run. I could keep my fitness, so to speak, up, or my aerobic capacity up. I certainly managed to keep a certain amount of systemic strength up during that, but I couldn't run. So when it actually came to race day, I had this altered gait because of my bad leg anyway. Now I'd been on that bad leg for weeks and weeks trying to hobble on it because it was the quote-unquote good leg that had been broken. So once I started to race, I was kind of all over the shop, and this bad leg had really started to protest. It had swollen up and said, we're not used to this kind of work. Why the hell is this happening? I got about 50 miles in, and I was so slow and so inefficient in my running. I was having to really slow down to try and keep a centre line. If I sped up, I was hobbling so outrageously it was going to end in disaster. And I ended up with hypothermia, so they had to drag me down off the mountain, and that was the end of that. So, going back to your questions about the whys and the psychological effect and what can happen and what people perhaps are and aren't prepared for, pain tolerance, a certain amount of pain recognition, which is something that I need to level out a little bit. You can see that somebody's saying, yeah, I think an ultra endurance event sounds cool. You could break down a little bit, and it's a very extreme story to tell, but you could break down little bits of that and say, well, are you prepared for X? Are you prepared for Y? What are you going to do if X and Y happen at the same time? What are you going to do if the unexpected, which is Z, comes along and just bites you in the ass? You know, how are you going to cope with failing? Because in the extreme endurance setting, that race itself has a 50% did not finish rate, so DNF.
Oh wow, that's really high, isn't it?
50% people don't complete that at all. The previous race I'd done was a 64% DNF. And so once you kind of push through to these really extreme events, your chances of finishing it diminish immediately.
Yeah.
You do something that's quite insane. So people say, yeah, I want to do that. And you think, well, you may be able to do that. That's an exciting thing to push for. But if you don't manage it, what's that going to do to you psychologically? And especially going back to your question about lifters or strength athletes, you may fail a lift and you may fail that top end lift that you've been pushing for. But in general, certainly in the gym, you're not failing. You're always completing. You're always pushing. It's hard, but if you fail all your lifts in the gym, then something's gone terribly wrong. You need to step right back. So it comes down to one moment where you know that it could be hit and miss. Whereas the ultra endurance stuff, you're pushing that kind of window out, and the parameters for failure become bigger, and the reasons for failure become sort of bigger and more less easy to control.
Yeah.
Again, if you can control for a lot of things in a gym setting, which you can, the variables are yours to manage and manipulate. The variables tend not to be quite so personally owned out in a endurance event.
Indeed. So in the training setting then for that, would you actually push somebody to failure at that point? So would you push them in an endurance wise? So, I mean, I don't know, I'm just going to use it as an example, but like treadmill running, for example, would you push them to the point where they literally jump off the treadmill, sit down with their head between their knees going, I cannot do it, I failed? Will you push them to that failure point to almost expose them to that failure emotion?
Yeah. Again, not every athlete, but it's certainly a tool that we can use. It depends on the athlete as well. You know, you've got, in general, and this is really generalizing, you're going to have kind of two different mindsets for any athlete, and you'll have experienced this as a coach, maybe just anecdotally as well. You're going to have people who really enjoy the intricacies, who really enjoy the tracking the details. So especially with an endurance athlete, that tends to, because the variables are a little bit different, certainly to the ones you might be used to in the gym. They might want to track heart rate, but we like to track heart rate certainly because that gives you a systemic output reading. They might want to track their cadence. They want to make it when they get into moving up and down hills. They might want to look at the gradient and the elevation and track heart rate changes over short periods and longer periods, etc., etc. And that's just heart rate. You know, I mentioned cadence. They might want to analyze and film running. This kind of stuff, and again, going back to a strength athlete, you've got guys who really concentrate on the numbers, they concentrate on the percentages, they're looking at the Preplin's chart, they're considering all kinds of different minutiae, and that's one kind of athlete. And the other kind of athlete, which I've kind of described myself as being, unfortunately, for ultra endurance training, and the guy that you see most in the gym, I would say, or certainly the one that's stereotypically recognised, the guys and the girls, are the ones that are kind of boom, gung-ho. They want to go in there, they want to push, they want to feel that kind of explosion of effort. Or if it's a sort of an anaerobic effort, they can find that dark place and they can stay in that dark place and enjoy that. And that's kind of a slightly different mindset. So you've got the how would you put it? You've got kind of exploders and doers, and those that kind of walk into the fire, and those that are going to also walk into the fire but stand and consider the heat and all the ratios there and how far do I have to walk first, etc., etc. Knowing what kind of athlete you've got or what kind of athlete you are is important for knowing when to or if to push people to that break point that you're asking about. So short answer is yes, we do sometimes, depending on the athlete.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And have you seen good quality effects from that? So they almost get pushed to the point where it's like, okay, I failed on that. And I understand what that nature of the feeling is going to be. So when they are in the actual race itself, do they tend to cope a little bit better? Or have you found athletes where you've used all of those protocols with, and then it hasn't made any difference whatsoever?
Yes, to the latter. Yeah, we find it works and find it doesn't work. For the most part, that will work with people. If you expose them to, it's the same as any kind of training in a certain sense. If you expose them to a repeat stimulus, they're going to adapt to that stimulus, or they're just going to step back. And this is the kind of the second part of your question: is they're going to step back and go, "This is not for me. Fuck this."
Yeah.
Excuse my French.
All right. I speak Spanish as well, so it's all right.
So they're just going to say, well, "I'm not doing this. This is just ridiculous." But I think you discover that quite early. You can see that in a lot of people's programming and in their feedback to you, even through online programming, in the way they analyze their own training. So if somebody says, "This is how I felt today doing this," and you know that their 1 rep max is, pick a number, we'll just say 150, and they're telling you they felt it was RPE 9 at 120. You're like, oh, okay. And I didn't feel like I liked it. I feel it was horrible. And you're going to get people that are that way inclined. You know that for the most part, and it's difficult to stereotype and pigeonhole people, but for the most part, if you push somebody who's always kind of regressive in their thoughts and second guessing themselves to a quote unquote dark place, that's going to be tough for them. So they might not know the why, but if you've been coaching them beforehand, you might know whether or not to push this individual.
Right. Okay.
Instead of a softly approach, you can talk to them a little bit about how this is going to feel, and that's good enough for that individual. It's not a right or wrong thing to have a certain reaction to stuff, but you can push them to a point. If you took one person and dunked their head under the water and held it there and said, "You're going to have to deal with this for a minute," one person's going to deal with it for a minute. Yeah, I can do it. Just do it now. You can get their head under the water and all the rest of it. Pull them back out. How did it feel? Horrible, but I can do it again. I'll go again. You get that kind of person.
Yeah.
Person number 2 probably can cope with that same horror. Why would you do this to people? But I'm trying to
I know, right? Talking about torture and special forces.
Well, we did talk about special forces earlier. We're looking at war. So we could take person number 2, and they might resist, but if we talk them through it and say, okay, what's going to happen is this? How are you going to feel is this? In general, we know this is what's going to happen. Before we go, you take a big deep breath, then you can get them under, and they'll relax under. They're not going to fight you. They're going to stay there. Is my minute done? And they're counting down in their head, and they pop back up. So the result's the same. The 2 individuals went under the water for 60 seconds and popped back up. One went in with one kind of mindset and came back up. One went in with another. I think this is a terrible attitude.
No, but to be fair, I really like it because I respond to that. And it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about, because this kind of training and this kind of coaching is personalized and it's individual, and it just annoys the shit out of me. See, there's my Spanish coming out. It annoys the shit out of me when people just get these generic cookie cutter programmings, because there's no one size that fits all. It does have to be personalized. Absolutely. And in terms of, you have to speak nicely to this person, or the other person is there and you're going to say, "Oh, sorry, did you leave your handbag at home?" You've got to do it personally to that individual. And it's the same for bodybuilders, powerlifters, and endurance athletes.
It is absolutely the same. And I think those are interesting, what's what I'm looking for, interesting connections to draw as well, because I think that has been another big problem that people are slowly peeling away, is that the idea is that in the gym, you get one kind of person. And in an endurance setting, so out on the trails or up in the mountains or in the great ocean or whatever, you've got another kind of person. And actually, people are people. What you do, they're just being exposed to different environments. So this person's traits and individualism and attributes and characteristics and their negative attributes, all that kind of stuff, is only in an environment. So if we change the environment, they've still got all those things. They're still that same individual. They may not have been exposed to this new environment, but the way they tick is still the same. So person 1, you can't say, right, we'll remove them and make them into an endurance athlete, and this is what an endurance athlete should look like, because you failed immediately, because you've forgotten, well, this is how Vicky responds to things, this is how Vicky sees the world, this is Vicky's sort of paradigm on pain. This is Vicky. We're going to take her over here. We're going to make her Johnny. It's like, well, yeah, there may be attributes that we can help develop that she's already got that make her do certain things that he's done. But what the bloody hell would be the point in that? Why don't we just get Vicky to do it? So, but that is, I think, as well as the kind of suffocating of programs, I think that certainly with endurance work, that's a big, certainly with trying to take people from a strength background and help them to experience an endurance world. That's a big problem, is saying, right, this is what an endurance athlete looks like, so we're going to treat you like this. You need to treat the individual like the individual.
Definitely. Like you were saying, we're all human beings, we're not numbers.
Yeah.
You know, we're not robots, so we have to be treated as such. Okay, so I'm just conscious of the time as well, Johnny, but I do want to get into one more thing, if that's all right. In terms of the mindset as well, what about things like nutritional protocols? So obviously for an endurance athlete, especially doing these ultra marathons and things like that, they want to do things in the quickest time possible in order to get their name on the leaderboard. So I'm assuming that they would need to have different nutritional protocols than somebody who can obviously take their time a little bit more and they just need to complete a race, for example. What would you say to somebody who's obviously used to eating at certain times and using their particular nutritional protocols, and then you're just going to say to them, right, well, guess what? You're probably not going to eat for about 8 hours because you can only stop every 8 hours to eat at that particular point?
Well, they're a good question. That probably wouldn't happen in an endurance event. What you would probably get would be in a longer setting. Let's look at and again, just because this is a personal experience, it's easier for me to draw on. If we look at the Arc of Attrition, which is a 24-hour winter ultra over the Cornish coast, beautiful event. You would get I don't know, every 25 miles or so, you get a big stop-off point.
Okay.
And I can relate this back to the spine as well in a second, but you would get a point at which there is a support network and there's people set up to make sure you're okay, etc., etc. Between those 2 points, because even though it's maybe only 25 miles, you're still looking at perhaps 6-7 hours, because it's not a straight road marathon. You're going up and down cliffs and scrabbling through hedges and you've gone wrong.
That's delightful.
So you during those 2 periods, you carry your food. It's as simple as that. So you wouldn't ever go for that long without sustenance, without some kind of nutritional aid. It would fail. You just wouldn't have the turnover. So generally, the athlete would carry their food. So again, with the spine race, it's even more extreme. The arc that I just talked about, that's a supported race. So you can also have individuals. So if you were my support, you can meet me wherever I said, listen, meet me in 5 miles on this back road here and feed me a banana, and then I'll see you 5 miles later. So you can have a supported race. You need to strategize that. You need to decide where that's going to happen, where that's going to be easiest for your support. So there becomes a little bit more strategy involved in just the management of the whole thing. Or it may be an unsupported race like the spine, where I have to carry all my food. I'm not allowed to have someone jump in and throw a banana over a hedge at me. I've got to carry that banana.
Right, okay.
If that's the case, or whatever that food might be, I then got to decide on how much I want to pack, therefore how much I'm going to carry, and that's going to change training. I'm going to train with carrying a certain amount of load, etc., etc. And I also have to figure out not only the scientific nutritional protocols, as in how much carbohydrate am I going to need over a certain time frame, per pound of body weight. You're also going to have to try and figure out, certainly over a larger endurance event, what do I cope with? What do I, what's the word I'm looking for? What do I take in easiest? So the go-to that you see with a lot of athletes in marathons and ultra endurance events are gels. You see them all the time, people on the bikes with the gels. That's just a straight shot of carbohydrate. But some people find that they take those gels in and they get GI issues, and then they're going to have to stop and start and go to the toilet, and the whole thing is just running with a sore tummy if you feel like you need it. That's a horrible experience. So this is where the experiential coaching comes in, and they're learning through doing. If you're going to be doing a 50-mile run, you're going to have to practice that nutrition, because if I say to you, this is what I ate, this is how I tried to manage the system, this is what made me not feel sick and energized and great over a 100-mile run, again, going back to that individualization, that might make you feel terrible. So for me, what I prefer to eat I eat sandwiches and things. Some people just can't stomach that much matter in them as they're moving, so they like gels. But it's the flip side with me. I quite like liquid nutrition, so I'll carry a pack with a big bladder in, and I'll drink carbohydrate-infused water, like Tailwind and things like that.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll put that down, and that keeps me going. Other people hate that stuff. It makes their mouth feel dry. You're not going to know until you're out there. So if you leave it to race day to figure that stuff out, you're doomed to figure that stuff. So you have to track the nutritional needs, how much energy am I going to need, what is the output, how much protein am I going to need to avoid the breakdown, etc. How much fat is going to make a difference in transit time, how long is this food going to stay in my stomach, all this kind of stuff. So you need to look at that physiological stuff, but you need to go back to the psychology and say, what do I like to eat? What do I like to eat, and what can I cope with eating? Very separate things. But the other, I know we're running short on time. The other thing there is that when you do a longer race and you're coming towards a stop-off point where you might get a meal, you might have been, this is a strange thing to describe, but you might have been thinking about a specific meal. You might have thought, when I get to point one, after my first 30 miles under my belt, I just want a big bag of chips. That's all I want. You'd be thinking about. For me, I might be thinking about a pint of beer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let anybody see. I might be thinking about that. And I get there and find all they're serving is chili and white wine spritzers. I'm going to tip the tables, and the whole thing's going to be terrible. The next 30 miles are just going to be awful for me. I might not even go back out. That sounds like a big huffy thing to do. But
Understandable, though. Completely understandable.
Yeah, so you need to make sure that you know what's coming. And this is a hugely important psychological tool to have in endurance training, very specifically, which you wouldn't have in strength training. So it's something for these guys to learn, is that longer strategy. Okay, so what's going to happen at this point? What's going to happen at this point? If I think out an hour from now, and this is before you've even started, an hour from hour 3, what's in front of me at that point? If my pace does keep up, and I manage to stick to the pacing that I've planned, I should be at this point by this time. What if I'm not? What do I then do? So if you're supposed to hand a banana to me at mile 50, and I've fallen down in a ditch, twisted my ankle, and now I'm slower, and you've been waiting an hour with a banana, then you have to go or whatever, and I get there and there's no banana. Not only is that, God, I was waiting to see Vicky. Seeing Vicky was important to me at that point. And now she's gone. Also, I've got no fucking bananas.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff Vicky, I haven't got a banana.
Then you have to strategize what your plan B would be. What happens if this happens? What am I going to do? And for the avoidance of sucking up all your time, there's a few anecdotes there that we can share maybe afterwards. But planning is huge.
Yeah.
Planning is huge in nutrition. Massive things to consider, but huge in the whole thing.
Definitely. And I really can relate to the whole psychological thing about tipping up a table, if you haven't got what you want there because it's chili and rice instead of, a burger and a pint. And just to bring it down very anecdotally, really from my experience, after my first bodybuilding show, I really wanted a pizza. I ordered the pizza and it came out. And when I ate it, I was like, this is not the pizza that I wanted. And I was so titsed off. And it was just like, no, I need something else. Because that is not the pizza that I wanted at the end of the day. So, yeah. But yeah, I can really relate to that. And it's very interesting, isn't it? So pre-planning things and making sure that you have people at certain pit stops, or you're going to have to carry it all. It's really important. Amazing. So what a show to end that note on, eh? Yeah. You need a Vicky with a banana in a hedge at mile point 50. And that is something really important to consider when doing a marathon. So, Johnny, it's been amazing speaking to you again. If you just want to give the listeners the links of where they can find you for some additional coaching, if you have some more spaces available, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me through the Complete Human Performance website, which is www.completehumanperformance.com. You can find me personally in the next couple of months at our new venture, Lift, in Edinburgh, which CHP have partnered with. We're providing some certification for coaches and templates and things for members. You can find me personally on my Instagram, which is Jonathon Pain. I think it is Jonathon Pain, straight up. That's it.
It's just Jonathon Pain.
no better than I do. And it's worth saying that although I'm representing CHP now, we have many coaches and many specialisms who can reach across the table and speak to another coach, and we can manage probably any kind of different disparate or specialist programming you may be looking for. So yeah, all those mediums, and on every one of your podcasts now.
That's it, yeah, every one of my podcasts. So what I'll do is I'll make sure I put all of the links under there. And guys, if you have any questions for myself or Johnny or any of the guys at CHP, then please put them in the comment sections and I will make sure that they get to the relevant people on time. That is it from myself then. So thank you very much for tuning in. Again, guys, if you do like the podcast, which I'm sure all of you do because I get lots of comments, please make sure that you give it a like and a subscribe, and just do some comments so I can keep on getting amazing guests like Johnny on. But so, yes, lots of love until the next time. That is it from myself, and don't fear the wait. Johnny, thanks again for your time, my lovely, for a second time in the month, and I'm sure I'll catch up with you soon.